It's been a busy week for the New York Giants so far at the NFL Combine, and we've got a bunch of rumors that we're going to pass along to you. That's coming your way next on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On podcast family, your team every day. My name is Patricia Traina, credentialed member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for Giants Country over on the Fan Nation Network. And a special welcome on in to my everydayers, my Blue Crew community members, my newcomers, and everybody in between. You are all appreciated and loved by yours truly. Thank you for making us your first listen of the day, or if you watch on YouTube, your first watch of the day. And on today's Locked On Giants podcast, we're approaching the end of the week of the first week of the NFL Combine. It's almost in the books. We've got a few more days left to go, but there have been some interesting rumors to come out of the Combine. And I'm going to give you what I have been hearing from sources at the Combine. Some of it may have already been reported, but some of it I don't think has been reported. So I'm going to share with you everything I have in my little notebook and let you guys decide for yourselves, what makes the most sense and what doesn't. So that is our agenda. Actually, we're going to start off with Saquon Barkley, and then we're going to go O-line. So let's kick things off because we've got a lot to cover. All right. This one is picking up steam, and this has to do with Saquon Barkley. Saquon Barkley, according to the New York Post, according to Aaron Wilson, who's an NFL insider, has apparently set his sights on the Houston Texans as a potential landing spot in free agency. Now, I want to talk about why that is a potential spot, a realistic spot for him to land, and what could unfold here. All right, so let's start off with why it's a realistic spot for Saquon Barkley to land. You can start with the fact that Houston has $67.346 million in available cap space, which means they've got the money to go crazy and spend on Saquon. The Giants, on the other hand, quite honestly, I think it would come down to either keeping Saquon or Xavier McKinney. And if they have to make a choice, I think McKinney might have a little bit more value at this point than Saquon. But let's get back to this other thing. So Saquon has reportedly, eyed Houston. And, another reason why he's potentially looking at it is the state of Texas is one of 9 states in the U.S. that does not have income tax. So for Saquon to go down there and get ridiculous money and then not have to pay income tax on top of it, it's a no-brainer for him. So there's no wonder why he might be looking at the Texans as a potential landing spot. Now, a source of mine told me that there is a better than 50% chance that Saquon leaves if he is not tagged by the Giants. So we've got to bring that into the equation here. I have said earlier on earlier shows that there is a possibility of the Giants using the franchise tag on Saquon for the purpose of executing a tag and trade. Now, some of you have said, what are the Giants going to get for Saquon? That's not realistic. But hear me out on this, folks, because this is why I keep saying this. If there is indeed real interest by the Texans for Barkley, and I have heard from sources that Houston does not have, as of right now, any running backs graded in the with first round grades, that they want an experienced running back to come in and round out their offensive skill set players, which includes quarterback C.J. Stroud, receivers Tank Dell, and Nico Collins, all of whom, by the way, are on their rookie campaign. So they go and they land a guy like Saquon Barkley. Let's say they give him, the spot track projected rate of 3 years, 30 million, and they give him 20 million guaranteed. Well, I can tell you that the 20 million guaranteed, if that's what Saquon got, would be probably a little bit more than what the Giants would be willing to give him. I'm still estimating the Giants giving him about 15, which is a little bit more than the franchise tag for this year. So that being said, if you're Joe Shane, who has said that he has not ruled out using the franchise tag on Saquon, if the threat of Houston coming after Saquon is indeed real, and there is, it's been picking up steam that it could very well be real, you put the tag on Saquon. You allow him to work out a deal with Houston. Houston has 8 draft picks, and you say to Houston, okay, you want him? You go ahead and sign him to a contract, but we want compensation. We want an extra draft pick, whether it be an extra second, a third round pick, whatever the case may be. All right. If the Giants can do that, now they have ammunition. They have additional ammunition. And I would think if, the Giants last year, remember, they got a second round pick and I think a 5th round pick for Leonard Williams, a guy who had a lot of tread on his tires, a guy who was approaching 30. All right. They should be able to get at least a second round pick for Saquon. I would be surprised if, he couldn't bring that in a trade. So let's say the Giants get an extra second round pick out of Houston in a tag and trade deal. Now they have ammunition to potentially trade up back into the first round. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that, coming up in the program. But the bottom line that I'm getting at is, while I don't believe Joe Shane wants to use the franchise tag this year on Saquon or Xavier McKinney or anybody, he does have that in his back pocket. And if he feels he can get something in return of value from a team that really wants Saquon badly enough to overspend on him, then he's going to use that tag. And it makes sense to use that tag. So that is something obviously to watch. Now, Saquon is not the only running back hitting the market. As we know, Josh Jacobs of the Raiders is hitting the market. Derrick Henry is going to hit the market. But, in terms of Saquon, you get the impression that he is the favorite of the Texans. If he becomes available, on the market, he's the one they're going to go for. Not Josh Jacobs, who had a bit of a down year, but Saquon. And not Derrick Henry, by the way, who's, getting up there in age. So that is something to keep an eye on. And I'll also point out one last thing about Saquon. This was actually reported by the New York Post, who mentioned that the Giants had done an analytical study on when running backs start to decline. And they calculated it to be at the age of 27. Well, guess what? How old Saquon's going to be? So I don't see the Giants getting into a, bidding war for Saquon. I think they're going to set their price. And if he wants it, great. If he doesn't, then so be it. And if you're Saquon's agent, remember, Saquon now has one agent, CAA's Ed Berry. He got rid of Rock Nation and Kim Miali. If you're the agent, you tell Saquon, okay, look, we'll listen to what the Giants are going to have to offer, which is what they are presumably doing this week at the Combine. But let's not jump and accept any offers just yet until we maybe get an opportunity to potentially talk to Houston. Again, assuming the Giants don't tag him, they can go and they can, when the legal tampering period opens up, they can go and they can talk to Houston. If the Giants do tag Saquon, and they say to Ed Berry, okay, we give you permission to seek a trade, then it's the same thing, except the Giants, instead of potentially waiting for a comp pick in 2025, which may or may not come depending on the contract he signs, they would get an extra draft pick that they could potentially use for this year for a team that needs an awful lot of help. So that is something to keep in mind, something to keep an eye on with Saquon and the Giants. Both sides have said they would like to continue their relationship with one another, but, sometimes circumstances just don't allow for it. So something to definitely keep in mind. All right, now that we've gotten Saquon out of the way, and I know some of you guys are sick of the fact that I keep talking about him on a lot of the pods, we're going to talk offensive line the rest of the way, starting right after this. Hey, Giant fans. Football season is officially in the books, but that doesn't mean the excitement of betting on sports is over. Right now, you can get buckets when you place your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. New customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. You can bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Head on over to fanduel.com/lockdown and shoot your shot. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, and I got combine rumors. And, listen, as exciting as some of these rumors might sound, remember, things change. When we enter free agency, things can change, unexpected things pop up. So I urge you, take them all with a grain of salt. Some of them may come to fruition, some of them may not. It all depends on what pops up and what happens. I mean, there's always curveballs that are thrown in there. But that said, let's talk offensive line because this is a big topic for a lot of Giant fans. Now, there's a debate right now with Giant fans, especially in the first round of the draft. They're like, okay, quarterback, do we go wide receiver? Do we go offensive line? And a lot of people are of the opinion that you fix the offensive line. The offensive line is still a mess. And if you've listened to me in the past, you know that I have been of the opinion that you want to make sure that whoever your quarterback is, whether it's Daniel Jones in this case or a rookie, that you have as solid of an offense at the other 10 positions as possible. Right now, we can honestly say that the offensive line is not solid, other than for Andrew Thomas and John Michael Schmitz at center. The two guards, we have no idea who they're going to be. Evan Neal is still a question mark, even though Joe Shane has said he's a right tackle. All right, and I'm going to go into that in a little bit too. So anyway, this is what I see unveiling, and this is what a source said to keep an eye on. When free agency starts, look for the Giants to obviously, because Carmen Brasillo, their new offensive line coach, came from the Raiders, to dip into the Raiders free agency. And two names they gave me to look at, obviously Jermaine Alamonar, and the other one is, let me see, Andre James. All right, now let's talk about Alamonar first. He played right tackle primarily for the Raiders. He also can play right guard, and he also has experience playing left tackle. In 7 years, according to Pro Football Focus, in 7 years, Alamonar has only given up 15 sacks and 81 pressures, as compared to Evan Neal, who in 2 years has allowed 10 sacks and 82 pressures. So, would Alamonar be an upgrade over Evan Neal? I would think so, based on those stats. Now, Alamonar, I had seen a report that he prefers to stay in Las Vegas, but, that's what players are going to say. What player is going to say, oh, I don't want to, be back here next year. But I have heard through sources that he would be very open to joining Brasillo in New York if the Giants made a fair offer. Now, Alamonar, I don't think would cost as much as a Mike Onwenu, who is set to be a free agent with the Patriots. Onwenu has guard tackle flexibility, just like Alamonar does. But and Alamonar is a little older, I think, than Onwenu. But still, he's a guy that I would keep an eye on as a possibility for the Giants to sign in free agency. He could also, if he does come in, he can compete with Evan Neal. Now, Joe Shane at the combine reiterated Evan Neal's a right tackle. That's as of now. That's not to say that that's how it's going to be moving forward. Now, here's something else to keep in mind. Carmen Brasillo comes with a reputation for wanting his players to be versatile. Unless you're a top 5 at your position, think Andrew Thomas, who's like one of the top 5 left tackles in the league. If you're not in that category, chances are Carmen Brasillo is going to ask you to have some flexibility in your position. So who's to say? All right. Now, I think we can all agree that Evan Neal is not in the top 5 of the offensive tackles. So who's to say that Brasillo, when he gets to starting to work with Evan Neal, doesn't say, okay, you know what? We're going to continue to develop you at right tackle, but you're also going to learn how to play guard at this level. That would not surprise me, ladies and gentlemen. It would make too much sense not to do, as a matter of fact. Now, here's the other thing with Evan Neal. Joe Shaden continuing to insist that Evan Neal is a right tackle kind of gives off the impression that he doesn't have to compete for his job. And that to me is a mistake. All right. Evan Neal, I know he was the 7th round. I know he was the number 7 overall pick in his draft class, but that should not mean an automatic scholarship for him to be the starter, regardless of how he performs. And that's kind of the impression that you've gotten the last couple of years with him, being on this roster, that it's been his job and his job only, and he doesn't have to worry about competition. And that, to me, is a mistake, especially given how he has struggled, considering, just how things have worked out for him. Now, I'm not saying that Neal has been lazy and hasn't tried to work at it, but I think the Giants have been short-sighted in not providing competition for that spot. They talk about how they like competition at every single spot, but we know that they don't put competition in every spot. Come on. We know that Bobby Okereke, for example, didn't have competition, or Dexter Lawrence didn't have competition, or Andrew Thomas didn't have competition. But guys that aren't solid players should have competition. And that includes Evan Neal. So you bring in a guy like Alamunar, for example. Let's say they were able to sign him. Then you know what? If I'm the Giants, I have him compete with Evan Neal for that right tackle spot. And may the best man win. And if Alamunar beats him out, then, if you're bringing Evan Neal along, at guard, you try him out and let him compete with Joshua Zudu and Marcus McKethan, who are going to compete for guard. Or at least one of the guard spots, right? And again, you let the best man win. In other words, don't hang your hat on the fact that Evan Neal was a 1st-round draft pick. That's the worst thing I think this Giant team could do. They're not that good right now to where they can be affording to give out scholarships, which is the impression I get when it comes to Evan Neal. All right, now let's talk about one other guy on the Raiders to keep an eye on. This is a guy who could provide maybe some depth along the interior, and that would be Andre James, who was the starting center for the Raiders last year, but who could also kick out and play guard if need be. Andre James, like Alamunar, should be a relatively inexpensive acquisition based on, what they had earned the previous year. They shouldn't come at a big amount. So you bring in an Andre James. Let's say they can, the Giants can convince him to come over to New York. Now you have him compete for a guard spot because, as I've mentioned before, the Giants have 2 guard spots open, left and right guard. Ideally, they would like for one of Azudu or Marcus McKethan to take one of those jobs. But as we saw last year, those 2 struggled before, Azudu ended up with the toe injury. So that's how I could see this potentially playing out. I think the Giants, as much as, I know I've been beating the drum for Mike Iwanu of the Patriots. I think the two Raiders guys that I mentioned make more sense. I think they might come at a cheaper rate than Iwanu, who's a little bit younger than both of the Raiders guys. But, again, nothing wrong with these Raiders guys. I mean, I just quoted you the statistics for Alamunar a tackle, and compared to where Evan Neal is after 2 years, I mean, you're talking basically a significant upgrade if he comes over and if he beats Evan Neal out for the job. So, one other note on offensive tackle, Tyree Phillips' agent put on Twitter that he is ahead of schedule 2 months after having surgery for a season-ending leg injury. That's good news. Now, Tyree Phillips, he also offers guard tackle versatility. So if you need a swing tackle, maybe you have Phillips compete as well. Or, if you have an offensive line that conceivably has Andrew Thomas at left tackle, Evan Neal at left guard, and I still say that that's the position I would like to see Evan Neal maybe try to win. Then you have John Michael Schmitz at center. Maybe you get Andre James at right guard. Maybe you put Elamunar at right tackle, and Tyree Phillips is your swing tackle. Now, really, you just need maybe a little bit more depth at that guard center spot. But you've got guys that you could flip if you need to. But anyway, the point being is that offensive line will be that much better. And, just as last year, I was beating the drum for the Giants to get consistency at center. If this team, it doesn't matter who the quarterback is. It doesn't matter who the receivers are. If this offensive line is not fixed, it doesn't matter. The Giants are going to have problems on offense. They're not going to be able to run the ball. They're not going to be able to throw the ball deep down the field. So the offensive line, ladies and gentlemen, from what I am hearing, and it makes sense, it's not surprising, it is a very, very high priority for the Giants to fix. Now, you're probably wondering, what about the draft? Would the Giants conceivably think of fixing the offensive line via the draft? I'm going to talk about that right after this. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. A lot of us spend our lives wishing we had more time. The question is, time for what? If time was unlimited, how would you use it? The best way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to know what's important to you and make it a priority. Therapy can help you find what matters to you so that you can do more of it. And if you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online and it's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suitable to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist. And if you find your assigned therapist isn't a match, you can switch at any time for no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, and we're talking combine rumors. Boy, this is going to be an exciting month coming up for free agency and the draft and everything. I can't wait to see how it all unfolds if some of these rumors come to fruition, because I'm excited by them. And I know you have to take them with a grain of salt because things happen. But if some of these happen, wow, it's going to be fun. All right. In this segment, I talked about the offensive line last segment, talked about free agency, but let's talk about the draft and how that could potentially factor into the equation to fix the offensive line. Now, according to one of my sources, three offensive linemen, all tackles, have first-round grades. They are Joe Alt of Notre Dame, Talise Fuaga of Oregon, and I hope I pronounced this correctly, Olu Fashanu of Penn State. Those are the three that all have first-round grades. So let's play devil's advocate here. If you're the Giants and the board falls a certain way, let's say, for example, that the three quarterbacks, Williams, May, and Daniels, are off the board, which they very well could be with the first three picks. Let's say Marvin Harrison Jr. is off the board. And let's say, for example, Roma Odunze, who I believe is maybe the receiver that the Giants might be favoring. Just a gut feeling on my part. I don't have any, evidence that that's the case. But let's say Odunze is off the board, or somebody trades up to get one of these receivers. If you're the Giants, does it make sense for you to try and trade down a few spots? Not necessarily with a team looking to trade up to get a quarterback, but maybe a team's looking to trade up to get an edge rusher or another position that maybe isn't as high of a grade that the Giants have on them. So let's say the Giants do trade down a little bit and they're able to get one of these offensive tackles, which, again, according to sources, have a first round grade. Would it make sense to do it? Yeah, I think it would. Now, some of you are going to say, but they've spent resources on the offensive line. How much can they spend? Folks, the offensive line is constantly, you look at it, it's very rare that the same offensive line starts week 1 and ends in week 17 or week 18. There's turnover, there are injuries, there are performance issues. If you're a team and you're not restocking that offensive line at least once a year, whether it be in draft or free agency, then you're not doing yourself any justice. So let's say, for example, the Giants trade down and they say, okay, you know what? We've got 2 of these 3 offensive tackles are on the board. And, at this point, there's no quarterbacks that we feel are worth taking. There's no receivers we feel are worth taking. Who's to say they wouldn't consider taking one of these offensive tackles? Which now, if they do, you say, okay, what do they do now if they, under my scenario, as outlined in the previous segment, what do they do with Alamunar and with James? Well, now you've got flexibility again. Again, you can move Alamunar to guard if you need to. James, if you get him on a cheap deal, maybe he becomes your other guard if Azudu and McKethan aren't ready, or he becomes your interior backup to, the guard spots as well as to John Michael Schmitz. So you now give yourself some more options in case something doesn't pan out. All right. Now, I'm not saying that's what the Giants are going to do. I'd be surprised if they go that route, but it's something to consider. So again, let's say the Giants do trade down and they take a tackle. And remember, if they trade down, they're probably going to pick up extra assets that, if they want to, will allow them to trade back up into the end of the first round, where if there is a quarterback that is borderline first round, borderline early second round, now they can go and they can get that guy. Or maybe if it's not a quarterback, maybe they go and they get a receiver that's, in that gray area where he's a borderline first rounder, borderline second rounder. All right. So the point here is that the Giants were not getting any comp picks this year. By moving down, they could potentially get 2 first-round draft picks out of this coming draft. Their original one, which, depending if they stay at 6 or if they move down, and then potentially trading back into the first round. And the benefit of that, ladies and gentlemen, is that now you have these guys for 5 years. Because remember, the rookie option, the option year and the first round draft picks contract gives you the guy for 5 years instead of having to worry about getting a guy for just 4 years and not having a place to plug them in. So there are benefits to doing that. Again, I don't know that that's how the Giants are going to go. It all depends on how the board falls, but it is something to keep in mind as we go through free agency, as we see how the rest of the teams around the league approach the draft, any trades that are made, free agent transaction, like I said. It's going to be an exciting time, and I can't wait to see how it all unfolds. And of course, I'll bring you all the news and analysis on how it unfolds. So, all right, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it for us here on the Locked On Giants podcast for the week. Hope you have a great weekend, and I will see you again on Monday.